Good day. This is Terry Difazio, and you're watching Dial It Up. Today, my guest is Shap Smith. Shap is the current Speaker of the House of Representatives in Montpelier. He is running for the Lieutenant Governor on the Democratic ticket, and that primary is Tuesday, August 9th. And at one point, you were going to be running for governor, correct?
That is correct, yes. I was actually in the governor's race.
Okay, and what changed so now you're running for Lieutenant Governor?
So last fall, I was in the governor's race, and unfortunately, my wife was diagnosed with breast cancer. And I decided to leave the governor's race so that I could make sure that we had enough support on the home front. We have two kids who are 14 and 11. And during the spring, while my wife got treatment, and she's finished treatment, thankfully, and is doing well, I was approached by a number of senators and others who asked me to think about running for lieutenant governor. Spent some time thinking about it. I talked to former Lieutenant Governor Howard Dean and decided to get into that race. I thought, given where my family was and where my wife's health was, that it would be a better position if I was elected for me.
Okay. Now, where do you currently live, Shap?
I live in Morristown. We live sort of on the border of Morristown and Johnson, and it's where I grew up. I grew up in Elmore and Wolcott, and I went to high school at People's Academy in Morrisville and graduated in 1983, almost 33 years ago.
Oh, okay, cool. Now, what do you feel are your biggest assets in the role of being a lieutenant governor? What role does the lieutenant governor play, and how do you think that fits best into your scheme?
Yeah. So the lieutenant governor role is one where you preside over the Senate. You're the president of the Senate. So you make rulings about any issues that people might raise during debate.
Oh, okay.
You try to make sure that decorum is maintained on the floor of the Senate.
Kind of like the vice president and the Senate.
That's right, exactly.
Now I got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
And you also are somebody who is one of three people who helps make up committees for what's called the Committee on Committees. And so you are involved in selecting committee members and committee chairs for the entire Senate. And you also have the role of stepping in should anything happen to the governor into the governor's role. So I think, as somebody who has presided over the House for the last 8 years, and I think even people who disagree with me understand that I try to call the balls and strikes as fairly as possible and make sure that people are treated well and respectfully on the floor of the House. I think I definitely have the qualities to preside. I have spent a lot of time working to make sure that we've got committees that work well together, and I'm pretty confident that I would be able to work well with members of the Senate, and I would bring my relationships with the House as well.
So you've been Speaker of the House for 8 years now.
I have, yeah.
What legislation have you been instrumental in helping to get through?
Yeah. Well, there are a lot of things that we've done over the last 8 years, and there are many things that I've been most proud of. Marriage equality is one of them. Recently, we passed a bill that will require that every Vermonter who's working gets paid sick leave, gets initially 3 days of paid sick leave, because, and frankly, almost every other industrialized country does that. It seems to me that if you're working and you're working hard, you shouldn't have to make a decision about whether you're going to stay home sick with your kid or not be able to, because you have to go to work to figure so that you can pay your rent. And other things, things like increasing the minimum wage, making sure that we're building more affordable housing for folks, and also making investments in our agricultural economy. So there are a lot of things over 8 years that there is to be proud of.
Now, as far as the minimum wage is concerned, where does Vermont stand nationally? We're on the higher end, lower end? Where are we on that?
We are on the higher end. We will move to 10.10 soon, but a lot of states are starting to jump ahead of us. New York just recently passed it, a higher minimum wage. Many other states are moving past a wage of 10.10. And frankly, for many Vermonters, $10.10 an hour is not going to pay for food, housing, and a car. And those folks who are working hard and are at the bottom of the economic ladder really aren't rewarded for working as hard as they're working.
I tend to agree. And the other thing I was going to ask you about was, I've heard rumor, and I don't know if it's true, maybe you would probably be more in tune with this. Is the federal government going to impose $15 an hour as minimum wage or not?
Well, I don't think with this Congress or this Senate you'll see an increase to $15. And what is frustrating from my perspective is I don't think that they are taking the interests of Americans into account when they hold back that legislation. Frankly, I think that all across this land, if people are working hard, they ought to be able to earn a wage that's going to allow them to have housing and food and health care. And the thing is that we subsidize, as a government, many of those low-wage jobs by people who are on Medicaid, making sure that they have housing assistance and child care assistance. So the fact that the wages are low is subsidized. We subsidize that as a federal and a state government, and that's a challenge for us, particularly at a time where many people are saying, hey, we don't want to spend any more in taxes.
Yeah, and you bring up an interesting point here. In some states where the minimum wage is extremely low and people are always griping about the federal government, certain southern states such as Mississippi or Alabama, they actually get back $1.6 for every $1 they put in. So the federal government is subsidizing their low wages also, correct?
Yeah. It is true, and it's a challenge. There are legitimate reasons for maybe like hiring high school workers why you might decide that you didn't want a minimum wage of $15. But for somebody who's trying to make a go of it, who's trying to actually earn a living at a job, for them to have a minimum wage, which is now $7.75 at the national level, it seems absolutely ludicrous. And I think that we need to do something about it. And we need to push at the federal level to get that across the line.
I was just reading something, and there are certain states that actually don't even have a minimum wage.
I know.
They just go by the Fed, and that's it. They don't, they don't even try to improve it or not.
Yeah.
And the truth of the matter is, it isn't just young kids, high school kids, and summertime people that are earning, that have these minimum wage jobs.
It's so true, and no, there are a lot of people out there who are getting minimum wage. Now, we have a scarcity of employees at this point in time, and that is driving wages up in the state of Vermont, but not enough. And we need to see wages driven up not only in Vermont, but we need it all around the country so that people can be rewarded for the work that we do. We have this culture, and it's a good culture, where we want everybody to work, and we want to try to make sure that we have a vibrant economy. But having jobs that don't really reward somebody is not the way to encourage them to go to work.
Yeah, the big, I don't know how to put this. Something that I hear all the time is Americans won't do those jobs. The truth is they won't do them for those wages. And I feel, I don't know how you feel, I'll let you express your opinion. I think that if you pay somebody enough money, they'll do it.
I think that is true. I mean, a lot of times people do complain they can't find anybody to work, and oftentimes it is that it just doesn't pay for them to do that job. And we need to make sure that people are rewarded for the work that they're doing. Our expectation also should be that people are going to work hard. I mean, we don't want to give people something for nothing, but I think if you're going to go out into the workforce and you're trying to make a go of it, particularly if you're a single parent, to have a job that pays minimum wage is not going to give you the ability to support your family unless you have government subsidies. And at that point in time, we're basically supporting employers who are paying low wages.
Yeah, and the truth of the matter is also, would you stay on welfare and have insurance, or would you take a minimum wage job and lose your insurance?
Right. That's the challenge.
There's got to be an incentive.
Yeah,
correct?
It's true. There does have to be an incentive, and I'm just going to take it a little further because I think that one of the challenges that we have in our system right now is that at a certain point in time, you do lose your benefit at a cliff. So you make $10 and you can get to keep your benefit, but if you make $10.01 an hour, you lose that benefit. And that's a structural problem in the government itself. And Republicans and Democrats alike understand that we've got to figure that challenge out. We don't want to throw somebody off or discourage them from taking a higher paying job just because there's a cliff out there. I've talked a lot with one of your local representatives about this, Michael Marcotte, who, and I think there are many people out there who really would like to see us set up a structure where as you go further up the ladder, maybe you get reduction in benefits, but you don't get thrown off those benefits.
Yeah, I tend to agree, and I've seen this affect several people where they've said, I don't want the raise because if I get the raise, I'm going to lose this.
Yeah, and that's nuts. I mean, we should not set up a structure like that. Many times that's because of the feds and the federal government, but we can do things on the state level as well.
Yeah. What do you feel is the most important issue facing Vermont today?
Well, I don't think there's just one single issue, but we have a number of challenges. And, there are three that I've been really focusing on. I have two kids who are in the local schools. They're 14 and 11. One's going into high school, one's going into junior high school. And I grew up and went to the same school that they're going to. I notice a lot more childhood poverty now, and it is impacting kids' ability to be successful in the schools. And I think that's a challenge for us, and we have got to figure out a way to address it. Part of it is making sure that parents are paid well if they're going to work. Part of it is making sure that these kids have stable housing and that those families have stable housing and affordable housing. But really, the other thing that we need is we need to give them the opportunity to be on an equal playing field when they get into the schools. So there's an organization called Let's Grow Kids that's talking about early childhood education that's quality childcare for all Vermonters and affordable childcare too. And we know, Newport struggles with having enough slots for kids. Many areas around the state do. We need to deal with that issue because early education gives those kids an opportunity to succeed in school, and if they succeed in school, that gives them an opportunity to succeed in life.
What issues, one, two, three issues, whatever you think, do you see as the biggest challenges for the Northeast Kingdom?
Well, so Northeast Kingdom has challenges around the economy, and that has been true for years and years. And certainly the J project and the stuff that was going to happen in Newport, it was a real blow to have the EB5 scandal hit. And we need to not only make sure that the whole process is scrubbed and we know that we're doing it the right way, but we can't forget that we need to make investments in the Northeast Kingdom. And so, I've talked with the mayor of Newport and the governor and with Senator Starr and with Gary Vians and John Rogers and Mike Marcotte. What is it that we can do that we can focus on making sure that there continue to be investments in Newport and other places? One of the things I'm talking about in my campaign is investing in downtowns, because I think that if we have vibrant downtowns throughout the state, that really is going to create a vibrant economy. And it can't just be in Chittenden County, it's got to be everywhere. So I'd like to focus resources to places like Newport, places like St. Johnsbury, other areas to rebuild our downtowns, create economic activity there. And I think from there we'll see a stronger economy.
Yeah, because if you notice in a lot of towns, the downtown areas they're dying.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's going to either malls or big shopping plazas.
You know, the challenge there is oftentimes it's cheaper to build outside of town than it is inside of town because there's already construction there. So we've got to figure out, a way to help make building in downtowns more affordable. We've got to make sure that there is not as much of a regulatory restraint for development in downtowns. And we've got to focus our resources. If we're, as a state, thinking about leasing buildings or building buildings, I think we ought to try to build them in downtowns or lease them in downtowns rather than out in a cornfield, because we ought to, as a state, live by the policy that we think is best for the state.
Now, how would you structure it so that it would give businesses incentive to rebuild downtown? Because you said something about, you mean there needs to be more incentive to build where there's already buildings as opposed to where it's a strip field. How would you do that?
So we already do some of that with downtown development tax credits. But I think that we can expand what are called tax increment financing districts around the state that allow you to use some of your property tax revenue that would usually go to the education fund and use that to develop downtowns. I think that you can also create a program like the Working Lands program that has grants that go out to working land enterprises, and create some grants for downtowns as well. You could call, and this is not my original idea, this was a guy down in St. Johnsbury who was talking about, why don't we just have a grant program that it would be competitive, where sometimes you just need a little extra money to make a project go. And I think we could do stuff like that as well. We also could refocus our efforts on Act 250 and make sure that we can expedite Act 250 within downtown areas.
Okay, explain for everyone exactly what is Act 250. I mean, I sort of have an idea, but I don't really know what it is.
So Act 250 is our state land use law. Okay. And it basically sets forth criterias that have to be met for development purposes.
Okay. Yep. And is this specific for urban or
Well,
downtown areas?
So it's actually specific for certain types of projects, no matter whether they're in downtowns or outside of downtowns. We do have some expedited processes for Act 250 where it's done in a growth center. I think we can do some more work there.
Most of us are familiar with what is going on in Washington and the partisan bickering that goes on down there. Do you see that same thing in Montpelier? Is it less? Is it more? Is it the same? Yeah. How do you see the two, or even actually Vermont has three parties, right?
Yeah.
How do you see it playing out? Is there more cooperation or less cooperation, or how does it work?
Well, I think that by and large, the work that's done in the Vermont State Legislature is free of a lot of the hyper-partisanship and bickering that happens down in Washington. Now remember, democracy is a forum in which you can have discussions about differing ideas. So we don't want everybody to be thinking the same way in our House or in the Senate and in our democratic institutions. I mean, I think the creative tension that happens as a result of differing philosophies really allows us to get to a better place. But personalizing it, I think, is where you get into problems. And by and large, I am very proud of the way that the House conducts its debates. And I believe that we are in a much better place than they are down in DC. Well,
I have a question here that came to me from someone. What proposals will you advocate for to spur economic growth in rural parts of the state, such as the Northeast Kingdom, which is a very, very rural area?
Yeah. So I think that part of it has to be about revitalizing the downtowns. But I was one of the people that pushed hardest for the Working Lands Enterprise Fund, making sure that those grants were available in rural communities for agricultural enterprises, because we really need to revitalize that. Now, one of the things that's not being talked about very much at all is the crisis that dairy industry is facing right now. The price of milk is so low. And I think when we go back to Montpelier, we've really got to work with the federal delegation to see if there's some way that we can help these dairy farms that are having a really difficult time as a result of the low price of milk. And you know, we did have the compact for a while. We did have other ways that we could support milk prices. There is the insurance program, but I was just talking to a woman who, she and her husband had just sold their farm in Chittenden County, but she was talking about the fact that many farmers are really on edge right now. And that's something that we can do to support our rural economies, is to make sure that these kinds of farms can stay in business and are supported, because they support the local communities as well.
Is there, in your opinion, I know of one specifically, is there any advantage for someone to be an organic farmer?
Well, the price of milk certainly is higher, although given the fact that more and more farms are producing organic milk, the supply is greater, and so the price has come down somewhat. But certainly, I think the margin is still higher if you're selling organic rather than traditional milk.
You're running in the primary.
Yep.
On August 9th. How many total, how many candidates are there in the Democratic primary?
There are 3 of us in the Democratic primary.
Okay. And do you know how many are on the Republican side?
Just 1 on the Republican side. In the governor's race, there are 3 on the Democratic side and 2 on the Republican side for the governor, and then just 1 on the Republican side in the lieutenant governors and 3 on the Democratic side.
And then in the general election, there's also the Progressive Party, if I'm not mistaken?
There is, yeah.
Because I know somebody that I see run every once in a while is Anthony Polina. I don't know what he's doing now, but I've seen him run before.
He is in the state Senate now.
Oh, he is?
Yeah,
oh, okay.
Yeah, from Washington County, although he has a primary on Tuesday as well.
Now, in Montpelier, there are 3 parties, correct?
It's true. There are 3 parties, and then there are a bunch of independents too.
Oh.
So in the House,
okay.
We have the Democrats, the Republicans, the Progressives, and then the independents have 4 or 5 members as well.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, there are 5. There are actually 5 independents, and I think 5 progressives.
How arduous is campaigning?
Well, it is pretty. It's pretty arduous. I mean, we're going every day of the week to all corners of the state of Vermont. So let me just describe for you what last weekend looked like.
Okay.
I started out in Lamoille County at my house. I met a good friend of mine in Richmond. We drove down to Rutland. We then drove to Bennington. We drove back to Rutland County. We spent the night in Rutland County. We drove down to Dover the next morning on Saturday morning for an 8 o'clock pancake breakfast. We then drove to Barrie, and then we went to Burlington, and then I went to Stowe. The next morning I got up, I went to Bristol, Vergennes, and then Newbury and home. So that was a 3-day stretch covering essentially the entire state of Vermont. And in each place I was meeting with different people. I was out sort of on the street talking to people on the street. The thing is, it's awesome. It's actually an incredible experience because you get to hear about what's happening in every part of the state, both good and bad. And there's a lot of good news out there. I mean, there's a lot of challenging things in the state of Vermont, but there are really a lot of cool things that are happening too.
What legislation would you like to see get passed in the next session?
Yeah, there are a couple things. One in particular, there will be a Blue Ribbon Commission that comes back with recommendations about how we can move forward with affordable quality child care. And there will be legislative recommendations. And I would like to see us implement those. And this is not just an issue about the kids, it's also an issue about businesses as well. Businesses are having a hard time finding employees throughout the state. Part of it is that parents can't find affordable child care. And we need to figure out a way to fix that if we're going to have a successful economy. I think business owners understand that as much, if not more, as their employees. The other idea that I am very interested in, Dr. Dinosaur, which was a children's health program.
Yes, I remember that.
Yeah, for Vermonters, and it was initially started by Governor Kunin and then expanded by Governor Dean.
Yeah.
It's a successful program that has gotten many kids in the state of Vermont health insurance. Well, there's a new idea out there that would expand it to every Vermonter who's 26 and under. And that would give an opportunity so that parents wouldn't have to worry about having high deductible plans and whether they had to make decisions about whether they could afford health care for their kids or not. And it would also give kids 18 to 26 the opportunity to have health care and focus on getting a job here in Vermont rather than focus on what is the cost of my health care and am I going to be able to live here.
Yeah, it would just seem to me that every other industrialized nation in the world has a universal health care plan except the United States. And someday I'll have you back and we'll discuss that.
Yeah.
Lastly, I want to ask, what do you feel sets you apart from the other candidates, and why should we vote for you as Lieutenant Governor?
So I believe that it's my experience. I've demonstrated over the years that I know how to run a body, that I can work with other people, and I am the one candidate that's ready to step in as governor if necessary should something happen to the current governor or the next governor. And I think that distinguishes me from the other two candidates.
Shap, I want to thank you for being on the show. We've run out of time. It's certainly been a pleasure, and it's been very, very informative. I'm glad to have had this opportunity.
Thank you.
And should you win the primary, we'll have you back, and we'll do this again, and
Great.
We'll continue.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Thanks for letting me be here.
This is Terry Difazio for Dial It Up, saying primary day is August 9th. If you don't vote, don't complain to me. Bye.